but welcome to the program, and I'll tell you a little bit about the Harris Center briefly. We're a nonprofit organization in the southwestern part of New Hampshire in the Monadnock region. And basically our mission, what we try to do every day, is to help people fall in love with nature and the natural world. We're a land trust. We go back over 50 years. And as a land trust, the organization has helped conserve some 26,000 acres of conservation land in the Monadnock region in a 8-town focus area, a lot of which is open to the public. We also do conservation research projects on our lands and in the region. And above all, most importantly, we connect people with the natural world. So education of all ages is very central to the Harris Center's mission. We have lots of programs, from everything from babies in backpacks and toddlers in tow to retirement programs. And we reach students every year at 30 different schools, about 3,000 students a year in classrooms. We have a rich calendar of events with a diversity of programs. If you don't know the Harris Center, check us out at www.harriscenter.org. And with that, I would like to introduce once again our speaker tonight, Dr. Rebecca McCabe from Hawk Mountain. And Dr. McCabe has worked closely with raptors and since 2014 has worked with snowy owls, and most recently is focused on the broad-winged hawk. And we will let her tell us why it's such an important piece of the conservation puzzle to her. So welcome to our friend and colleague, Dr. McCabe. Take it away.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Phil, for the kind introduction, and a big thank you to the Harris Center for inviting me this evening to talk about our exciting collaboration studying New Hampshire breeding broad-winged hawks. Before we get into some of our findings from our research thus far, I wanted to introduce our fabulous study species and provide a little bit of background on why Hawk Mountain launched a project to study them. So the broad-winged hawk, scientific name Buteoptypterus, is a small, stocky raptor, similar in size to the American crow. Features that many of you hawk watchers and birders may be familiar with is that typical buteo shape with those broad, flat wings and that dark trailing edges on the wings. For adult birds, they have these distinct white and black broad tail bands seen here on this individual in flight. And for some of you that may not be hawk watchers or birders, you may have heard this bird while you were working in your yards or out on the hiking trails in the spring and summer months. This is that typical high-pitched whistle call that we hear in the forest. So during the summer months in the Northern Hemisphere, broad-winged hawks breed throughout southern Canada and eastern and central United States, seen here in red on the map. As a long-distance complete migrant, the entire breeding population vacates their breeding grounds and migrates south into southern Mexico, Central and South America for the wintering period, and that's seen here in blue. Broad-winged hawks are known for their large kettles that are formed during migration, a spectacular sight to see at hawk watches throughout the range, especially at the Veracruz River Raptor site in Veracruz, Mexico, where they count over 1.9 million broad-winged hawks each autumn. So although we don't see that many broad-winged hawks at our hawk watches in the north, your local site, the Monadnock Raptor Observatory, counts on average just under 9,000 broadwings each fall. About 265 miles southwest from Monadnock, we here at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Kempton, Pennsylvania, count anywhere from 8,000 to 13,000 broad-winged hawks each fall. So although it's one of our most numerous migrants, the broad-winged hawk has been showing declines at hawk watch sites throughout the eastern part of its range. The Raptor Population Index, also known as RPI, is a collaborative effort led by Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, the Hawk Migration Association of North America, Hawkwatch International, and Birds Canada. And the ultimate goal of RPI is to understand and share trends and the conservation status of our migratory raptors across North America. And the map you can see here on your screen shows a 10-year trend for broadwings at hawkwatch sites in North America. So all the sites with red arrows are showing sites that are seeing significant declines in broadwing numbers. And all the sites with green arrows are indicating significant increases in numbers at those hawkwatches. The sites that are indicated by those blue dots are in the hawkwatch network, but they currently do not have any trend data for this species. And one of my favorite things about studying broadwings is that they gather in these large kettles during migration, creating quite the spectacle. But then during the breeding period, they're challenging to observe due to their camouflage in the forest and their secretive behavior. For example, to the untrained eye, an active broadwing hawk nest can be difficult to spot. All three photos here show active nests, one of which shows you the piercing eye of the adult glaring back at you. In addition to the declining trends at hawkwatches in the east, there have also been reported declines of nesting in some states and provinces throughout their range. For example, here in Pennsylvania, nesting has declined by 16% since the 1980s, based on data from the 2 Pennsylvania breeding bird atlases. More specifically, we can see declines in these southern regions of the state. So the yellow blocks indicate active broadwing nests in the 1980s atlas that were not active or confirmed in the mid to late 2000s atlas. So with these reported declines during both migration and breeding, Hawk Mountain launched a full annual cycle study in 2014. And our goal was to study both the breeding and non-breeding ecology of this species and to try to determine what factors could be influencing these declines. During the breeding season, we assessed various behaviors using nest cameras and on-the-ground field observations. And we also assess habitat characteristics at both the micro and macro scale using various habitat measurements in GIS software. To study behaviors outside of the breeding period, we use telemetry to learn about the habitats and threats these birds face throughout their non-breeding period. And the findings from our telemetry work, especially in New Hampshire, will be the focus of the rest of the talk this evening. Since 2014, we have been deploying telemetry units on broadwings in Pennsylvania, 12 of which provided complete tracking data for breeding, migratory, and wintering periods. With the continued support from donors and grants and project collaborators like the Harris Center, we have expanded our study into Connecticut, deploying 3 transmitters in 2021. And during the last 2 years, we've deployed 5 transmitters in New Hampshire and an additional 5 transmitters on broadwings in Ontario, Canada. We were thrilled to team up with the Harris Center in 2021 and continue that collaboration into this year. And so maybe a few of you on this Zoom call tonight had the chance to go out in the field searching for broadwings. And what we do is we start off by going out to known territories or areas where sightings have been reported, or potentially searching new areas that seem suitable for nesting broadwings. So we scan the treetops looking for stick nests, which are often found in the main crotch of a deciduous tree or in the upper portion of an evergreen tree. And if we're lucky, we will see signs of activity, whether that is a fresh stick added to the nest or an adult sitting low in the nest looking back at you. In New Hampshire, Phil and the rest of the field crew have been busy the last 2 years. With all of their efforts, we've had success and confirmed 15 active nests in the region. This map here shows all of the active nests from 2021 in orange stars and all of the nests from 2022 in pink stars. So of those 15 confirmed nest sites in 2021 and 2022, we were able to gather a little bit more information about the timing in the breeding period, as well as nest attributes. So for those 15 nests, we have an approximate date of hatching for June 24th, and an approximate date of branching, fledging, or when the young are leaving the nest as July 19th. As far as other habitat characteristics, it seems like most of the broadwing nests, over 50% of them, were found in white pines, but we did have a few nests in red oak, red maple, and one nest in an eastern hemlock. We're also gathering other measurements like the canopy cover, the nest tree height, and the nest height. And we found that broadwings in your region are nesting about 65 feet from the ground, or 20 meters above ground. And of those 15 nests, over 20 young broadwings fledged. In addition to finding the nests and recording nest attributes, we then monitor them weekly to keep track of the development of the young. So once the young are at least a week and a half old, they have the ability to thermoregulate on their own, and the female reduces the amount of time she spends brooding the young. And this is actually an optimal time for our team to come in and attempt to trap the adults at the nest. And so I thought it would be really cool to share with everyone how we go about trapping broadwing hawks at the nest. So we have a couple of key items that we use for trapping. One being mist nets, barely seen here on the right. And we use 3 poles to put up 2 mist nets near the nest tree. So the idea is that when the birds fly towards our decoy, they don't see the nets and they get caught in one of the pockets from the net line. Then we have a pop-up blind seen here on the right, and this gets placed near the mist nets so that the person running out to retrieve the bird once it's caught stays camouflaged throughout the trapping process. We also have our awesome assistant, our Robo Great Horned Owl decoy. And for those of you that don't know, great horned owls are predators to many of our raptor species. So if one is found near an active nest, the adults will get really defensive and start to dive bomb the owl to get it away from their nest site and young. And so here is a short clip showing Robo Owl in action. And so with our mist net set up, Robo Owl placed between the nets, trappers inside the pop-up blind, and the great horned owl call is playing from a portable speaker, we are now ready to lure in the adults. Once we get the adults in hand, we take a series of measurements and data to help gather as much information as we can about the bird before releasing it back into the wild. Various body measurements are taken, fat and crop is assessed, molt is documented, and each individual is banded with a USGS aluminum band that has its own unique identification number. And we also color band individuals that are specific to our research project. So you can see here, this individual has a yellow band over an orange band. So for those individuals that are of the appropriate body weight and body condition, we affix a 9-gram GPS or satellite tracker via the backpack harness method. And both the transmitter and the harness combined meet the 3% body weight standard. Once the bird is outfitted with a transmitter, it's then released back into the wild shortly after processing. And just to give you an idea, 9 grams, I looked this up online, is about a tablespoon of butter or 2 pieces of paper. And one of the most exciting parts of doing this type of research with telemetry is the fact that we can sit back and wait for the data to trickle in and see where these birds go. But first, I want to introduce the birds from the New Hampshire region, just to get everyone familiar with them. So broadwings that we tagged in 2021 include, on our far left here, Harris, an adult male from the Hiroshi territory. Then we have Monadnock, an adult female from the Dublin territory, and another adult female, Thelma, from the Willard Pond territory. And here we can see the map from fall 2021 into spring 2022 for these 3 individuals. You can see Thelma is in green, Harris in pink, and Monadnock in blue. So all three of these birds initiated fall migration between September 15th and September 18th. Then during the second and third week of October, they all passed the River of Raptors watch site in Veracruz, Mexico. And finally, they arrived on their wintering grounds as early as October 25th for Harris and as late as November 27th for Thelma. And before I share more about the migrations, I wanted to quickly share an interesting story of Harris and Thelma. So these two individuals nested about 6 miles from each other in 2021. They both had 2 nestlings. However, unfortunately, Thelma's nest did fail. But they both started fall migration around September 15th and September 18th. And they arrived in 2 distinct wintering areas, Harris in Colombia and Thelma in Brazil, meaning that they wintered over 1,500 miles apart, which to me is kind of crazy. They're nesting 6 miles from one another and wintering over 1,500 miles apart. That's pretty incredible. So we received spring migration data from Thelma and Harris only, and they both took a more westerly route back north. They initiated spring migration in a larger time window between March 6th and 24th. So Thelma started first around March 6th, and Harris started moving once Thelma approached his latitude in Colombia around March 24th. And they both arrived on their wintering grounds between April 16th and May 13th. So this past summer, we joined Phil and the Harris Center team in the field once again, and this time we tagged 2 adult females, Scadutaki, I don't know if I'm saying that right, from the Dublin territory, and Nubanusit from the Willard Pond territory. So in addition to the newly tagged adult females seen here in orange and white on the map, we also have returning birds, Harris and Thelma, that are still tracking. And so all of the birds actually initiated migration around September 15th and the 16th. And they passed over Veracruz during the first and second week of October, with Thelma and Scadutaki passing Veracruz at the same time, and Nubanusit and Harris trailing behind. We had an exciting opportunity to follow the 4 New Hampshire birds, along with 4 Ontario birds and 1 Pennsylvania bird this past fall. This is the most tracked birds in one season that we've ever had the privilege to follow them live during fall, so really exciting for us here at Hawk Mountain. But due to the lack of the cellular network connectivity in the tropics, we are currently waiting on updates from many of our tagged broadwings. But for those of you that are interested in observing their movements in more detail, you can check out our website, www.hawkmountain.org/bird-tracker. And so what's next for the Broadwing Hawk project? Well, we will continue to follow up with our historic nest sites here in Pennsylvania and attempt to recite all banded and telemetry tagged birds throughout our different populations. And what's really great is these data will shed light on survival in the wild and when and where mortality occurs, as well as site fidelity across their ranges. So are they returning to the same breeding area? Are they hitting the same stopovers? And are they going back to the same wintering areas? And so as we continue to collect movement data from the tracked birds, we will analyze all breeding and non-breeding movement data to identify those key stopovers, roost locations, and wintering and breeding habitats. And just an example here, this is Harris's movements from last winter. And Harris settled down in Antioquia, Colombia. And you can see his kind of movements as he goes around the mountain here, but has a concentrated area going out for little foraging forays every so often. So we hope to analyze these data to see what types of habitat he used, and we'll wait to see if he returns to the same location this winter, because currently, the last time he checked in, he was moving from Panama into Colombia, and so we think he's almost down at his wintering territory. So then we want to go, our goal is to compare all of our recent and future tracking data with our study that we published in 2020 in the Wilson Journal of Ornithology. And for that study, we used tracking data from our Pennsylvania birds tagged here. And then we also collaborated with the University of Alberta and the Smithsonian's Migratory Connectivity Project to compare the migration ecology of Pennsylvania and Alberta broadwings. And you can see here this map, this is showing the different movements from those individuals in that study, and then the dots of where they wintered. And they wintered in 10 different countries, as far north as Mexico and as far south as Bolivia. And what was really great is that we also had multiple years of tracking data for certain individuals, and we could see that they showed strong site fidelity to their wintering sites. So they continued to come back to the same area each year. And we also got a lot of other information from the tracking data from when they arrived on their wintering grounds, where they stopped over, the fastest rate of travel, and a lot of other great information. So in 2021, we published a paper in the Journal of Raptor Research with one of our collaborators and a former Hawk Mountain Conservation Science trainee, Sandra Cuadros from Lima, Peru. Sandra analyzed winter tracking data from several individuals, and the goal was to assess land cover composition on the wintering grounds and assess any anthropogenic threats that were occurring at those wintering sites. And the average wintering area for the broadwings from that 2021 study averaged about 244 square kilometers, so a fairly large area. And those wintering areas were dominated by submontane and lowland evergreen forests. And so here's an image of an individual, and the outlined black polygons are the wintering areas, and then they're overlaid with habitat maps. So you can see the protected lands, the forests, and the urban areas in relation to their wintering home range. We also found that most of the birds in our study wintered in areas that were affected by either forest fires or deforestation, and some birds, especially in Peru, their overwintering areas overlapped with illegal mining. So a better understanding of the threats that these birds face as they migrate south out of our area. And another exciting finding from our research tracking, especially with these New Hampshire breeding birds, includes new insight on pre-migratory movements. And so 3 out of the 5 New Hampshire birds displayed these types of movements. The first one being Monadnock, which occurred in 2021, and Monadnock is seen here in blue. And so she left her breeding site on August 19th and traveled 160 miles to Richford, Vermont. So we can see here, she went all the way up almost at the border there for Canada and the US. And she stayed in that area until she started to migrate on September 16th. This summer, Nubinusit, seen here in white, left her breeding site on August 18th and traveled 132 miles to Hope Falls, New York. And then she stayed there until September 14th, when she started making more southbound movements. And finally, Scatutaki, seen here in orange, kind of blew us all away with her movements post-breeding. And she left the Dublin area on August 4th and traveled over 300 miles north to La Tuque, Quebec, before she decided to migrate south on September 14th. And so Scatutaki is the first bird with this extent of pre-migratory movements. A lot of our other birds had smaller movements. So this is kind of quite incredible to think about why they're doing this, what's special about those regions that they're going to. Is it potentially a natal area, or were they doing some exploratory movements in another migration that allowed them to find that site has suitable prey so they can beef up and continue on their southbound migration. So a whole new avenue of research is opening up with more and more birds showing these pre-migratory movements. We did report pre-migratory movements in our previous study when 3 of our Pennsylvania breeding females departed their nesting grounds in July. And so you can see here's Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, and we have an individual that was tagged not far from the sanctuary, and then 2 others that were tagged up in the Pocono region. So again, all adult females were doing this, and these individuals only traveled about 28 miles from their breeding area. So when you think of PA birds, on average 28, and then the New Hampshire birds over 100 miles. That's just something interesting that we're seeing with these 2 different populations. And these guys also left their nesting grounds as early as July. And we had camera footage to show the last time the female was at the nest, and her tracking data showed her depart. And then the video footage showed the male coming in and delivering prey to the fledgling still. So really, really interesting. We're also really excited because now, as each year continues, we're gaining more and more information, collecting more and more data. And so it leaves room for amazing collaborations with other organizations and collaborations within Hawk Mountain. So we have an incredible network of former trainees and graduate students, all of which are using our movement data or our nest site data to be able to ask really important questions and hopefully produce some really great results to help us understand more about this long distance migrant, as well as other forest raptors. And we're really, really excited because we're going to be expanding to Vermont and Quebec in 2023. We're going to be teaming up with the Vermont Institute of Natural Sciences, VINS, up in Vermont. And we're also going to be teaming up with some banders in Quebec. We received funding from Birds Canada Bailey Fund and Bird Protection Quebec. So we're hoping to expand our sample sizes for each population with the goal of deploying 3 more transmitters in Quebec and then 3 transmitters in Vermont. And so it's been really great to expand our collaboration network and get more people involved, and then continue to learn more and more about this species. And so as I wrap up my talk this evening, I wanted to leave time for questions, and I also realized that I kind of talk really fast, but that I wanted to share a quote from Hawk Mountain's founder, Rosalie Edge. And I'm just going to read the quote to you. It says, "The time to protect a species is while it is still common." And I think that's very fitting for a species like the broadwing hawk. Currently, there is an estimated 1.9 million individuals in the global population, and the International Union for Conservation of Nature has them listed as least concern. So at the moment, there's no major threat to the species' global population. However, those of us that are familiar with the extinction of the passenger pigeon know the importance of protecting and conserving a species before it's too late. So I also want to add that this work is highly, highly collaborative. And the great thing about teaming up with someone like the Harris Center is just getting to work with really passionate people who are excited to learn about nature and just assist in any way that they can. And so it's been really, really amazing to team up with everybody up there at the Harris Center. So a huge, huge thank you to all of the New Hampshire Broadwing Project staff, volunteers, landowners, and supporters. I don't know, I hope everyone's here on this list, but if there's others, we're really, really grateful for all that you've contributed, because it really does take a village to do this kind of project. And we're super, super grateful for everyone's assistance in that. And also, we want to thank all of our collaborators since the beginning of this project. This project kind of started out as a 2-year project. I did my undergrad or my master's thesis on this, and it just kind of snowballed, and we gained more excitement and more donations, and more questions started to develop. And so it's really incredible to see this project at this stage with so many organizations and collaborators involved, and people just interested in a hawk that I will be honest and tell you, 10 years ago, I didn't even know existed. So it's really, really cool to see everyone come together for this species that I do adore. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions and talk more about any of the New Hampshire breeding birds.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much, Becca. That was a wonderful picture that you painted of what it's like to focus on research on this species and why it's important. And there were a lot of great questions that came in, so I'd love to jump into some of these and maybe dig deep and
Please, yes,
and see what else we can learn. So I'll take them in the order they came in and pass some along to you. Some of these you did answer throughout, such as where have the nest sites been? David and Tanya asked that. While we don't disclose exact locations of nest sites, there are some reasons to keep that data a little bit more on the down low for protection of the bird primarily. We did provide some general locations of where these birds nested. Can you speak to that though, Becca, about protecting the birds during the breeding season?
Yeah, so I'm sure many of you know that just animals during that time period when they're breeding and rearing their young, it's a sensitive time for them. And so if we as humans can sort of reduce our impact and disturbance on them, it just means that they're going to be successful. So when I think about, we go out and we do our nest checks and our visits, if we're in a pop-up blind, we're camouflaged, or if we're going in to collect data, we're trying to be as quick and efficient as possible. So reducing the stress to the animal is really important and not disturbing them doing their thing in the wild. So we too at Hawk Mountain, we don't share the information of the nests, and even our tracking data has a bit of a lag to it. So if you were to go out and see that a bird was in a location, there's a delay to that. So that bird may have already left. And that's, again, for the protection of the bird.
Great. Okay. And I guess related to that, Cindy thinks that she has broad-winged hawks nesting in her yard in the summer. She sees a pair of them regularly. How should she best document that? This is an area that's not exactly within the Harris Center's research area, so that might put it in a slightly different category, but what would you recommend?
Yeah, so a lot of people will still use eBird to report any nests, and eBird does have a category. If you can submit a photo of the nest or any observations with time and date associated with that, that's really good. We actually have an undergraduate honor student that we're working with who's mining all of those data from all across North America to be able to confirm whether that's the right species. And we're doing this for all raptors. And that's something at Hawk Mountain we've been talking about, that there's not really this cohesive database with nest reports. And so when I started my master's research, I kind of thought somebody was going to hand me a list of all of the broadwing hawk nests near Hawk Mountain. And that didn't happen because that doesn't exist. So we had to go to things like the Breeding Bird Atlas or, the listserv, the bird listserv, and ask for people to tell us, hey, I have a broadwing in my yard. You're welcome to come observe it. And so we're trying to think about how we can sort of put that in a database and have that. So if research questions come up, we have access to that. And so if ever you feel like, hey, we want to let Harris Center know, but Harris Center will let us know. We are starting to keep a database with coordinates, so lat long, and then any other information you have about the nest. So.
Great. Hopefully that was what Cindy was looking for. Let's talk a little bit about some of the actual banding and fixing the transmitters. Fran asked, how do you hold a hawk without being pecked at? And as a follow-up question, why wouldn't you use a glove?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second question. So using a glove sometimes can it gets in the way, and you really want to be able to feel the bird because they have talons, right? Sometimes with a glove, it's really clunky and you don't know if you're in between the legs or not, or if you're, rubbing up against the bird's body. And so a lot of the times you see people with ambassador birds with gloves, and that's because the bird's sitting on them. And so the talons are directly on top of them. As we're holding the bird, the talons are beneath our hands. So we put our hands in between the legs. So just imagine this is a hawk's legs, and we'll do like a little hold like this. And so the talons are down here, they're away from, scratching us or getting at us. And then we're holding the bird in a way that it feels safe and secure. And actually broadwings and a lot of other budios, at least here that I've had experience with, are quite docile. And so as researchers, we're trained to observe the bird's behavior. And if the bird starts to get stressed, or fidgety, we assess that and make those decisions of, how quickly to release the bird, or if we can continue taking all the measurements we need. And so it's a really in the moment, observing the bird, handling the bird. But for the most part, broadwings, and Phil can say this too, they're kind of docile in the hand, and they just hang out, and it makes our jobs really much easier, so we can quickly process the bird and get them back into the wild.
I will say, in holding these birds and preparing them for release, they took advantage of any inattentive moments where I just took my mind off the bird and would just try to get out of your hands as quickly as possible if you didn't have complete attention focused on them. So
correct.
That was pretty amazing.
Natural for them to do
this
so.
sixth sense. Yep. And relatedly to attaching transmitters, Jeffrey asks, how do you actually affix the transmitter to the bird, and what is being harnessed over the bird's wings?
Yeah, so I didn't go into too much detail because I thought it might be a question, because it's an interesting one, in that we put on a backpack. So just imagine, how you put on a backpack, but instead of your straps kind of going over your shoulders, we do a crisscross. And there's a little breast patch that sits on the keel. It's made of leather, and we use a type of material called Teflon or Spectra, and it's really smooth and soft, and there's no edges to it. And this is because we don't want to cause abrasion to the bird's skin. So as it sits on the bird, it's just sort of kind of like a snug backpack that doesn't cause abrasion, but also keeps the transmitter in the right place. And so we put the transmitter sort of in between the wings on the back. And with that breast patch on the keel, it just kind of sits there and doesn't hinder the birds while they're migrating, or when they're coming back on their breeding grounds and copulating. We've been putting transmitters on this species in particular since 2014. Other studies did it prior to us. And so there's a lot of research showing that it doesn't impact the bird in a negative way. And so for the few birds that we're putting this on in comparison to their entire population, we're learning so much, but it also makes us feel good to know that we're also not, impacting the bird in a negative way for it to live out its life cycle. Yeah,
Hey,
and
Jeffrey,
we do have some cool videos. If you go to our website, hawkmountain.org/broadwing, we have a whole landing page with lots of information about the project. And there's also a tab for videos, and we do have a video on there for our transmitter process. So you're welcome to take a look at that in more detail.
Thanks. Jeffrey, thanks you for that explanation. And he also had a question about the altitude that broadwings are flying at. Do we learn anything from these transmitters about that?
I wish. That's the hope for the future. So we are working with technology, and as you know, right, you have your phone and it can do all these amazing things. But the smaller the tech gets, the harder it is to kind of jam in all of those great features. So right now, we're getting latitude and longitude, and we're hoping for the future that we could get a more precise value for altitude, because how cool would it be to have some birds up in a thermal and to get that movement data, especially just like, every minute or something, and then to really be able to map a thermal and to see how high they get, and then when they stream out of a thermal. And so that's the future. I think we have to wait a little bit longer for that, but it's feasible. That's something we have for the transmitters that we put on snowy owls, which are much larger. I mentioned the broadwings are 9 grams, and the snowy owl transmitters are about 40 grams. And so you can pack a lot more tech into those bigger transmitters.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Nancy asks, what happened to Monadnock? She noticed that there was only one blue line on the map.
Yes, this is the struggle again with the tech. Unfortunately, we've had birds in the past. They kind of go silent once they reach the neotropics, and we don't know what happened to them. We try to go back to their territory in the summer and get eyes on them to see if maybe they, removed the backpack. That is possible. They can, the Teflon and the spectra is supposed to be sturdy, but we have had some birds that have actually, picked it off. And then, for example, we had a bird here at Hawk Mountain, flew all the way to Columbia, similar to Monadnock. We never heard from it again, but when we checked the territory in the spring, there she was, and we could tell it was her because she had on her bands. And so she removed her transmitter. We actually retrapped her. She was healthy, everything looked good, but her transmitter came off. And so that could have happened to Monadnock. The other, doom and gloom side of things is that maybe she didn't make it. I'm sure many of you know there's still raptor persecution occurring throughout these birds' range. There's shooting as well that happens. And so something like that could have also happened. But we'll continue to check Monadnock's territory moving forward. Maybe we'll get a resighting of her and have some hope that she survived and the transmitter just stopped working or came off.
I think that was the case with Monadnock this year, because we did have one of our volunteers sight a bird that was banded in that area.
Yes.
And we determined it had to be her.
Yes.
So she was back. I put in a lot of hours looking in that territory, but couldn't track down her nest. And,
right. And did you have a sighting of her, or just the?
I think I saw a bird with what I would call a small antenna at one point early in the season. So
okay. So yes, sorry. I have a lot of birds.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there are a lot of birds to keep track of. But yeah, she was back, and hopefully she's alive and well. But unfortunately couldn't track her down in 2022 for a nest.
Right.
So let's see. More questions are rolling in, and we're doing well on time here. So let's get to all of these. I think Judy's question was answered about why some birds go north in the fall, and that was one of those revelations about the pre-migratory movements that you were telling us. Yep. So I think that answers that. Maybe do you want to speculate about that a little bit? I know people are wondering what this is about. And
I mean, the only thing I can really think of, my mind keeps going back to natal grounds, because we know that young birds disperse and they don't go, well, for some species, they don't go back to where they nested because now they're competing with their parents, right? And so I'm wondering if maybe that's what happened. If you think about, say, Scarutaki was in La Tuque, Quebec, and that's where she was born. And then when she started to move south, maybe she did those pre-migratory movements as well to sort of explore some potential breeding habitats for the future. Again, that's only speculating. If we could put more transmitters out on young birds, I think that would really shed light into that. We have done it. Again, unfortunately, young raptors, they have a high mortality rate in their first year. Upwards of 70% of them don't survive. And so these tracking devices aren't super cheap yet. They cost, originally, when we first started the study, they cost $3,000 a piece. And then you also have annual data charges that go upwards of about $1,000. But now the transmitters we're using are about $1,500 with less than $1,000 data fee charges. And so you can imagine, if we put out a transmitter and there's a high percentage of the bird's not going to survive, it's not ideal for us. So we want to put these on adult birds at the moment. And until the tech gets cheaper, we're going to kind of stick to that.
Okay, a question came in from Alec about food preferences. What do they feed their nestlings in particular? I know you and I both have some experience watching nests. So yeah, what have you found overall? I know what I've seen locally in New Hampshire, but it might differ slightly.
Yeah, well, here in Pennsylvania, our broadwings really like eastern chipmunks. They're a nice hardy prey item that have enough biomass that they can feed to their young. They're generalist predators, so they're eating songbirds. I've seen broadwing hawks raiding a songbird nest. I've sat and watched a nest where the adult came in with a downy woodpecker chick and then 10 minutes later came in with another one, 10 minutes later came in with another one, and they raided the whole woodpecker nest. They eat frogs, they eat snakes. I haven't seen too many observations of them eating insects, but it has been reported, and especially during migration, and I'm thinking too when they're down on their wintering grounds. There's a whole assortment of new prey items that they're consuming. But Phil, for you, for being up there, you spent more time observing the New Hampshire nests throughout the breeding period. Was there any one main?
Yeah, for as often as I watched the nests for the 2 summers of the project, I want to say the nest I had the most experience with was in 2020 during the pandemic spring and summer, watching a nesting pair right in my backyard. And so I got to watch the most food deliveries that year. And yeah, of all those things you were saying, the mammals, there was I think a star-nosed mole was delivered once. Moles, chipmunks, a snake, and interestingly, a bat right around sunset one evening. That was the most exciting find, a small bat.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so pretty generalist. I wanted to end with some conservation related questions here. Amelia asks, are there any potential threats to broadwings on the horizon that we can identify now, or some of this research can point to? I think you kind of hinted at it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, land use change is a big one. So for the little bit of analyses we've done for stopovers, we know the birds prefer forest on their breeding grounds, and we know they actually prefer forest on their wintering grounds. And from short analyses that we did, it seems like they also prefer forest on stopovers and when they're roosting. So when you think about that long sort of route that they have going between North and South America, it's important that they have habitats that they can stop over and rest and refuel. And so that's a big thing with land being converted, wind turbine farms going up, other agricultural lands, being converted forest to ag lands. So that's a big thing. Also, like we talked about in the wintering grounds, we're seeing forest fires. How is that going to impact birds when they're down on their wintering grounds? Fortunately, they're mobile, they have wings, they can get up and fly away. But what does that look like when you have, some of these massive fires, which have been occurring more frequently? What does that do for them? And if their wintering area gets burned up, where do they go the next winter? And the same thing with, illegal mining and deforestation and people still shooting hawks for sport. That's definitely happening, and we have colleagues in Colombia that report that, and so I'm sure broadwings are an easy target in those big flocks. So, yeah.
Follow-up question: any tracking effect on the effect of 5G on populations of broadwings that you know of?
No, I have not heard of that. The new tracking devices that we're using, I think the tech isn't quite there. Like they have that as an option, but I know 3G, since it's being faded out. For example, we were using satellite telemetry units in the early part of our study, so we didn't have to worry about that with the 3G network kind of getting put to bed, but like for some of our snowy owls, that was the case. And so we're hoping that, the tech kind of stays up to date. And these transmitters, we're lucky if they'll last more than 1 year. So the tech companies promise us at least a year, but they're hopeful we'll get more years of data. And that's what's kind of great about working with the company, to be able to conserve battery life and change the number of fixes we're getting, because ideally we want these units to last as long as they can, because that's more data we can collect to hopefully help us answer, these questions that we have.
Great. Okay, just a couple more here. I guess my question is something that I know we've talked about, and a little bit about, what our anticipated role might be in helping better understand this population. Our work being the Harris Centers and the work being done on the New England population. We've looked at these birds closely for 2 summers. Is there value in spending more time looking at nests and territories in 2023 and beyond? And
Yeah.
what can that tell us?
Yeah, and that was something sort of, we talked about, my colleague and I, Dr. Lori Goodrich, of sort of the future of the project and how we can kind of have that foundation for other regions that want to continue this work. And Phil, we talked about this when we were up in the summer. Really to understand a population and to gain as much insight as you can, you have to have long-term data, and that's really challenging in today's age, right? Everything, that's time, that's money, that's energy that goes into it. But the Harris Center has an amazing network of people. I've met many of them, and so if people are just engaged and passionate about getting outside and studying, the backyard bird of New Hampshire, I would say, continuing to collect nest data is really great. Continue to find these territories. I mean, we don't even know like the threshold of a forest. How many broadwing hawks can it support? Of course, you not only have broadwings, you have other raptors as well. So a lot of things we're seeing down here is our forest is changing. There's more fragmentation. We're seeing other raptors coming in. So great horned owls, red-tailed hawks, and we're seeing broadwings, shifting their territory slightly. So what does that mean for this species and their success at rearing young? With climate change, we don't know how that's going to change their migratory period. So are birds going to start arriving earlier or later? And then how does that impact competition on the breeding grounds? And so I think just having people out documenting this is really important, and having like a standardized protocol for, where to submit your observations, try to find the timing, when do the adults start incubating and when do the young hatch and when do they fledge and how many fledge? If a nest fails, why does it fail? And even just having a coordinate of a nest, we can learn all of this information about the habitat using computer softwares, right? So we can look at land cover use. We can look at, how close a nest is from a road. So that's all the stuff that we can do on the research side of things with people just getting out and finding nests. So who knows if there's more room to continue tagging birds. We're trying to be strategic because funding is always a big concern. We would love to keep putting on transmitters here in Pennsylvania and in New Hampshire, but we recognize that there are costs associated with that. And so we're trying to expand out so we can sort of learn more about other populations, to try to tell this bigger story versus, what are New Hampshire and Pennsylvania birds doing, and try to say like, what is, the Eastern population doing and what's the Western Canadian population doing, and is it that different? So
great, that's a great answer. Thanks so much. I know, we've talked about some of the strategy and what's involved, and it's a question of how to prioritize these scarce resources. And
right.
One resource that came to light was that there are a lot of people who are now knowledgeable about broadwing hawks in our neck of the woods. So we'll certainly be counting on all of you to get out there again next summer and helping us track these existing territories, at least, even if we're not putting new transmitters on next summer. And those, still plenty of data to roll in, hopefully, with the birds that are currently transmitting.
For sure. And even just the appreciation of the species, I think is the biggest thing. The biggest takeaway is educating yourself about, a common nester you have in your area. And then maybe your neighbor wants to take down all of the trees in their yard. And you can come in and say, hey, but you have this incredible bird that's nesting on your land. And, maybe rethink that, or wait till the nesting season's over. Or I think, right, the biggest thing for these takeaways of these projects is to just get more people engaged and aware of maybe a species they didn't have much knowledge about and the ecosystem that it's in. So that's the ultimate goal, right? So
wonderful. And George and others have indicated, one final question, I guess, is how do we best support this project moving ahead? How can we continue to support the Broad-winged Hawk Project and all the good work being done by Hawk Mountain and the Harris Center on this work?
Yeah, well, getting involved is the first thing. We love help, and again, having people interested and wanting to be engaged. So whether you're acting as a volunteer, Phil, I guess, would be a good connect for that. If you're interested in getting out in the spring and helping him find nests, he could kind of get you situated for that. Of course, if you're like, hey, I don't want to be out in the forest that time of year, or maybe you don't have that time, there's other ways you can support us by adopting a broadwing. It's a really cool gift idea that we have here at Hawk Mountain. So if you're looking to, put in a Christmas stocking, hey, you've helped support this great research, that's a way to do that. And again, those funds are used for all of our projects. So expanding into New Hampshire and the New England area, supporting just your organization by becoming a member. Harris Center has a lot of great things to be involved with, Hawk Mountain as well. We welcome all members from near and far. And so really just supporting your local conservation organization is another great way to help with that. So.
Okay, perfect. And I see Brett put a couple of links in the last couple of comments there, so you'll have to scroll up a little bit, but lots more information online about these birds. But thank you again, Becca, and thank you from all of us for this wonderful presentation and helping us learn a little bit more about this backyard bird. Yeah. And lastly, a thank you to everybody who tuned in here. Great questions, really engaging conversation. So that's about it. We're right on time here, and we'll let you go and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Keep an eye on those hawks on their tracking site. Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot.